Hi and welcome. We are back with Alta Asks Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I am Alta's digital editor. This is episode 14. This Alta Asks Live, if you're unfamiliar, is the digital version of Alta Asks, an author interview series we do at altaonline.com. And our host is Heather Scott Partington. Heather is a teacher, a book critic, spectacular regular Alta contributor, and she hosts this wonderful series. So we're really excited to have Heather here to interview her friend, author and podcast host, Tod Goldberg. Todd's here to discuss his Gangland book series, his Literary Disco podcast, whatever else he wants. We're going to go
Battle
about
of the Network Stars, maybe. I've always wanted to discuss that.
Maybe Battle of the Network Stars. We're going to go about 30 minutes today, so please ask questions. You can ask them here in the comment section. There's a little question button at the bottom. If you're unfamiliar with Alta Magazine, we are a quarterly. You can subscribe to us for a mere $24 a year at altaonline.com. Most importantly, however, we want to support our independent bookstore partners and our authors. So if you're excited by Todd's work, if you haven't read all of it yet, there's a button right below us that will bring you to bookshop.org, and you can see
single word.
Read every single word that Todd's ever written that's available on Bookshop. Again, ask us questions. I have a great time. And with that, Heather and Tod, take it away.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Hi, Tod.
Hey, Heather. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you, too. How are you doing?
So today's been a pretty big day for me, Heather Partington. Can I tell you about it?
Yeah.
I got a haircut today. I didn't leave my house because that's not something we do anymore in the Goldberg home, leave the house. But my wife, my lovely wife, Wendy, has created a full grooming section of our home. She's been grooming the dog. That's segued into grooming her husband.
Well, looks good. She did a great job.
It's the first all clippered haircut I've had since my frat boy days. Which
got a little fade happening.
Yeah, I got a little high top fade. Ready to go to the Tri Dot Formal. Looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun.
So you also had some news you posted today that today was the official reveal for your next book. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, right. Yeah, that did happen today. Yeah, so my corporate overlords, the good people at Counterpoint Press, just officially announced the cover of my new book. And I got to say, there was a little bit of controversy, Heather, and you're to blame. Apparently, Alta, in advertising this event, used the cover, which is publicly available, to promote the event. But today was the first big day where we got to send it out there, and it is so cool. So my new book is coming out in February, and I'm hoping to be alive in February, and I'm hoping sort of everyone else is with us. But it's called The Low Desert. It's a collection of short stories that takes place between Palm Springs and Las Vegas, basically. And it's all crime stories and gangster stories. So if you've read my Gangsterland books, these are short stories about some of the characters that are in the books. It brings in new characters, and also there's stories that are completely unrelated to Gangsterland that are part of something new that I'm working on.
And it's wonderful. It's a great book.
Thank you.
Can you just talk about the Gangsterland, the world of Gangsterland at this point, how it started, where you are with it, what's happening with the series?
So the series actually began in 2009. I wrote a short story called Mitzvah that was in Las Vegas Noir, which is one of those Akashic city anthologies. You know, they do Las Vegas Noir, Boston Noir, Martinez Noir, Richmond Noir, wherever someone, I guess, pitches a successful idea to Akashic Books, they do a noir series. And my neighborhood to talk about in the Las Vegas Noir was Summerlin, which is where I had lived for several years in the late 1990s. And so I wrote about a hitman named Sal Cupertine from Chicago. And in the short story, I wrote about his last day on the job as a rabbi at a synagogue in Summerlin. And as soon as I sort of finished writing that story, I guess I wrote it in 2008 and it came out in 2009. I knew that this was a character that I wanted to write more about. What I didn't have at the time in 2009 was time. I had 4 more books under contract to write for Burn Notice, which I was writing at the time. And I also didn't really know much about the Jewish faith, which is odd when you look at me and you hear my last name as Goldberg. And I knew if I wanted to write about a rabbi or someone becoming a rabbi, essentially, I had to be more well-versed in my own culture and my own religion. And so I spent a couple years sort of reading all of the great books and the eschatology and the philosophy and everything, and then wrote Gangsterland between 2011 and 2012. And then the book came out in 2014. And the book is it takes aspects from the short story, but it expands the full story. We change the timeline and stuff. And it is the story of Sal Cupertine, who kills 3 FBI agents in Chicago and is hustled out of town, and gets a job working as the Rabbi David Cohen at a synagogue in Las Vegas. And he, in order to be successful at his job, has to actually become a rabbi. And so far, that's been 2 novels, a short story collection, and Amazon optioned the books for a TV series. So good things are happening with it. I'm going to write a 3rd novel really soon, right now. I'm deeply in. If my editor is watching this, I am so deep into my 3rd novel. I can't even begin to tell you about it. So I didn't expect that this was going to be a character that would take me through 12 years of my life, but it turns out that it's been something that I find that I'm able to mine for my criminal delights, but also that I enjoy taking intellectual approach in some regards to crime, and having this person pretend to be a rabbi has forced me to understand much more about religion and my own faith, but also about the connections over time between organized crime and religion, and those are deep.
I've heard you speak before about, and I'm just going to jump right into like violence and death, but I've heard you speak, I've heard you speak before about your approach to writing about death in your books, and that writing this series has become maybe not a changing moment for you, but has forced you to consider how you handle death in your stories. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I was younger and writing crime fiction, I think I wrote a lot of sort of cartoon violence in the stuff that I did. And this is both in my novels and in the short stories I wrote when I was younger. And it began to bother me, the sort of laissez-faire attitude I had about killing in my books. And more importantly, the laissez-faire attitude I found about killing in other people's books and TV shows and movies, where it was like a character was in Star Trek and you'd shoot them and they'd just disappear and there was no repercussions for that person dying, as though every single red shirt in Star Trek didn't have a mom or a sister or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever. And so when I started to write the Gangsterland books, I really made it a point that if someone was going to die and if someone was going to kill somebody, that there was going to be a consequence for both the killer and the killed. And that, I couldn't throw a rock into a pond and not have the ripples reach the shore eventually. And so I've tried to do that. And there are some murders that happen in the first Gangsterland book that aren't going to pay off until the last Gangsterland book. I know how it works. And there are some things that happen in the first Gangsterland book that I pay off in the short story collection. So my intention is to not make killing or death amusing. I want it to be violent and traumatic for the people involved with it, even the people that are doing it out of their own volition. That no one commits an act of traumatic violence and walks away from it unscathed unless they're a complete sociopath. And even those people, I think, sometimes have some lingering issues with it.
You write a lot about, in writing about these crime families and organized crime, especially, you write about a lot of the guys who are like the middle management of organized crime. And that's not something I feel I haven't, well, I'm not a huge reader of crime fiction, but I think that one of the things that I really like about your books is that you have these guys who, most often guys, who are just kind of struggling to get along and who are trying to navigate these codes for themselves that they feel like they have. Is that something that's important to you as you're developing these characters, is looking into how they compartmentalize, how they make it okay to make certain decisions?
Yeah, for sure. And also I'm sort of fascinated by middle managers, just in general. Like the plight of the assistant manager is something I'm very interested in. Like, oh, dude, you got to wear the short sleeve shirt with the tie. You have limited authority. How do you express that authority? I find that fascinating in all aspects of my life, not just when I go to Best Buy to, pick up an adapter. By the way, adapters are the bane of my wife's existence. And every time I say, I have to get an adapter, she's like, you do not need another adapter. But that's not related to the question you asked. I think the middle management or the soldiers in a crime family, and this is true for the government as well. And, I do a lot of compare and contrast between the government, organized crime, and organized religion in the books. And what you see is that a person has a code until such time as they don't. And so, for instance, today, when the New York Times is reporting on the contents of John Bolton's book, John Bolton is a guy who never got to the top. John Bolton was the guy who was always about 5 steps removed from the top and always wanted to be the top guy, always wanted to be the guy who bombed Iran or bombed North Korea. And what you find out in a situation like this is when he really disrespects the person that he works for, he will wait until someone offers him cash to reveal the things that would bring that person down. Not honor. He's not doing it for honor. He's doing it for money.
Right.
And it's no different than an organized crime. A guy will kill a boss or an underboss or whatever if there's a financial incentive somewhere else down the line. Because the thing about people in organized crime is that they don't have a retirement plan. They don't have long-term health benefits from this.
Right.
So, and in fact, an actuary would probably tell them that their health benefits versus their likelihood of death are it's a bad percentage. Yeah. And so they're always going to do something to secure their own future eventually. Like they will keep omerta or whatever for about 15 minutes until they need something that's going to improve their own standing. And so I'm fascinated by the guy who gets in and feels like there is some sort of romantic notion about this thing that he's in. And then he turns 40 and his prostate starts to give out. And he's got lower back pain. He's got tinnitus from all the gunshots. And he really needs to see a doctor, but he doesn't have health insurance. What does he do? So these are the things that compel me, the mundane aspects of that criminal life. Because it's not glamorous. It's drudgery. Right.
I feel like in your and in your new collection too, one of the things that's really great is seeing all of these characters, many of whom we've met in the novels, seeing them kind of out in the world. So because the geography expands, they are interacting with just like normal people in diners and casinos and bars and sitting next to clowns and, just being, I guess the clown part's not normal, but seeing them
it is in Palm Springs.
I know. But seeing them juxtaposed with sort of ordinary people also reveals a lot about them as characters. And that's something that I really like. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Salton Sea, because the Salton Sea features in the new collection. It's also, you wrote a beautiful essay for Alta about the Salton Sea. And I don't know, so I'm from Northern California, as you know. I didn't know about the Salton Sea at all until I went to college in the desert. And I was just wondering if you could kind of set up for our viewers what the deal is with the Salton Sea, but also how that fits into this world that you're expanding, the Gangsterland universe.
So the Salton Sea, for those of you not in California, is a huge ecological disaster that was caused essentially by avarice and greed. You might be surprised to learn. So in 1905, the Columbia River was essentially diverted into an ancient salt plain in the Imperial Valley, which is between Palm Springs and San Diego. And it flooded this salt plain for, I think it was 18 months, and it created this vast inland sea called the Salton Sea. People have been trying to rewild this portion of California since the 1800s. There was this idea that they could turn this part of California essentially into an inland Riviera. The weather is quite nice. If they could create commerce out there, it would be pretty cool. It would open up another, metropolitan part of California, essentially. And so there had been ideas about this for a long time. But what no one really paid any attention to was the salt. And it turns out that that place is just not fit for life. The salinity was profound. The runoff from both the Colorado and then the New River in Mexico, which flows into the Salton Sea north, oddly enough, was polluted. But there was a time where it was just about okay, and this was in the 1950s and the early 1960s, and they began to develop the Salton Sea as both as a place where they were looking for oil and also geothermal technology, I guess you call it. And so land developers came in and began to develop around the Salton Sea in the 1950s and the early 1960s. They built an infrastructure for 150,000 homes. They built a marina. They built clubs and bars and all of these things. And for a few years, this was the place to be. Desi Arnaz would come out. They would put on shows, and there was great water skiing. It was the fastest water in America, and so they'd have speedboat races. The thing is, the land around the Salton Sea was developed by a guy who they called Mr. Palm Springs, and he was a gangster. And he was a gangster from Illinois, and he developed all of this land around there and basically told people that there was a chance that people would find oil, which there wasn't any chance they would find oil there. There was no oil. But he built all of these clubs and nightclubs and everything, and was at the same time building parts of Palm Springs as well. And he was a mob-connected land developer, and so he was corrupt. And so this is sort of a little-known story about this great boondoggle of the Salton Sea. The reason they called this guy Mr. Palm Springs is that he never left Palm Springs. And the reason he never left Palm Springs is that Palm Springs is an open city. And what that means in terms of organized crime is that anyone can come in there and do crime as long as you don't screw anyone over. They're not going to kill you in Palm Springs. If you do leave Palm Springs after you screwed people over, they will kill you. And so this guy in particular never left Palm Springs until his mom died. And he flew out to Evanston, Illinois, in I think 1983. He went to his mother's funeral. As he walked out of his mother's house after the funeral, they blew up the house around him.
Oh,
so it's sort of this rich, untapped, organized crime story. And so my short story, that's the title of the upcoming book, The Low Desert, fictionalizes a great some of this. Like I took the idea and I've turned it into my own thing. But the Salton Sea is a true and real California disaster. It is decaying. It's creating abnormal cancers and diseases out in the Imperial Valley. The people who live around the shores of the Salton Sea are some of the poorest people in America. And in order to clean up the Salton Sea, it would cost California something like $9.8 trillion or something. Billion. And there's just no great plan in place. The problem is that if the Salton Sea continues to degrade, there's no saving it now. That's only holding it in place, essentially. It's going to create an even worse ecological disaster that is going to send, noxious dust clouds across the whole of Southern California. So basically, imagine this vast global pandemic and then clouds of noxious gas from the Salton Sea filling your home.
Good times.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Good times. Well, would you like to read your part of your essay for us from Alta?
Sure. Should I read like 2 minutes worth?
You can, however much you'd like to read, Mr. Goldberg.
I think it takes about 4.5 minutes to read this.
Go for it.
Don't let me, if I start reading in poet voice, someone in the comments, let me know. So this is an essay that appeared in Alta's winter issue, and it was very nice of Alta to ask me to write this. A few months ago, I drove 30 minutes from my home in Indio to the shores of the Salton Sea to see an art installation. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 7 years ago, that sentence would have seemed absurd. No one went to the Salton Sea for anything, much less art. But as California's great inland sea and its most profound environmental mistake has begun to die more rapidly, it has become ripe for metaphor. Here exists folly, it screams out. Come interpret it while it lasts. On this day, here existed, as part of the site-specific exhibition Desert X, an installation called A Point of View by the Colombian artist Ivan Argote, a circle of stairways to nowhere, reaching into the sky, surrounding the north shore of the sea. From the ground, the stairs seemed benign, 16 steps up to a 5-foot-wide platform, no railing. But then you climb them, and suddenly you're thrust into the desert sky, and it's hard not to feel uneasy. You think, I could die out here. And that's the truth. You could die out here, because everything appears to be dying out here. Even the air has a suggestion of death, from the stench of the tilapia, whose bones crunch along the desiccated shoreline, to the remnants of a winter of dead birds, victims of avian cholera, and to the hydrogen sulfide gas, often at dangerous levels, wafting off the sea. If you fell, on most days, it might indeed be a long time before someone found you, only the burning sun to keep you company. At least, until the coyotes showed up. And I will stop there.
No. Thank you. It's a fabulous essay. I recommend that. Beth will probably put a link in our chat to it. So if our viewers want to go and look it up, they can. Your new book, there's information on the Counterpoint website, and that's coming out in February of next year, right?
Do you think we're going to make it?
I have hope, but hope is a dangerous thing right now. So
hope is that thing with sulfide gas.
Yeah. Can you tell, I wish we would have had a lot of time. Can you just talk quickly about your 2 podcasts that you are a part of, because they're phenomenal as well?
Sure. So I host 2 podcasts, as Heather said, Literary Disco, which I co-host with Ryder Strong and Julia Pistel. And we've been doing that for about 8 years. We have over 170 episodes that we've done. And it is inexplicably popular and inexplicably hailed by weird places like Good Housekeeping told us they liked it. I was like, Good Housekeeping? What the hell is Good Housekeeping? Listen to our podcast. But on Literary Disco, we read a book or something each episode and we talk about it. But it also ends up being a long conversation about ourselves and our lives and all that too. And Ryder and Julie and I all went to graduate school together, and we each have strong opinions about everything. Right now, we're in the middle of our great pandemic read, which is Middlemarch, which is super long.
I've read
Middlemarch
it.
might be longer than the pandemic. So much
it's
furniture.
good. I liked it. I know not everybody likes it, but I liked it.
I'm getting into it. I tell you what, I sort of did not have a lot of sympathy for Dorothea, and then I started to feel a lot of empathy for Dorothea. And now I'm like, wow, Dorothea got a bad lot. And it turns out Casaubon, not a great guy. Crappy guy. The second podcast I host is actually a radio show and podcast, and that is a show called Open Book, which airs on the local public radio in the desert called KCOD. And I host that with Maggie Downs, the author of the brand new memoir, Braver Than You Think. And on that show, we interview authors or creative people. Sometimes we interview psychics. Maggie has a tendency to meet a lot of life coaches that she wants to then interview, or former basketball stars that she wants to interview. And so we do whatever Maggie wants, basically. But it's, again, a show about books, but it's mostly a show about the two of us arguing with each other about the things we both like that the other person dislikes. And that airs every 2 weeks under normal circumstances. We've been doing it every week. We'll probably take some time off over the summer, as we usually do. But it's that show's been on, I guess, almost 3 years now. And Maggie and I have a wonderful time. We're good old friends, and we like to fight with each other on the internet and on air. So it's nice.
And can you let people know where they can find you on social media and the internet and such?
You can find me on social media at Tod Goldberg. That's 1D in Todd and 1D in Goldberg. And todgoldberg.com. You can become my Facebook friend. You could like my author page, though I never visit there, and I'm not real sure why I have it. Does anyone, Heather, can we do an episode of Alta Asks?
Yeah.
Where you get 20 authors together, and
Okay.
we just ask each 20, like, what do you do on your author page? Does anyone ever visit your author page? Why do we have an author page? No one likes them. When I get asked to like an author page, it's horrible. I don't want to like anyone's author.
Oh, you don't mean like the website. You mean on Facebook or something?
On Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they're going the way of the dinosaur right now. Honestly, I feel like people are all saying the same thing. Like I don't want to have a separate page and my own page. You're just going to put your Facebook rants and your book promotion material all right there in one feed.
That's what I'm saying. Look, can we all just agree we don't have to like anything on anyone else's page?
Yeah, no.
I'm glad we had this time to talk about this, Heather. This is an important part of the Alta Asks that you did not ask me in the print.
Good. Yeah, it's an important meeting of the minds. So we're gonna have Beth come back, and if we have questions from our viewers, she's
welcome back, Beth.
You okay,
nice
Beth?
To see you.
You too.
Have you been running, Beth? Did you just?
I went out for lunch and came back, so hopefully all these questions that I asked you haven't already discussed. No, we've got an array of questions. I actually have some questions of my own. My first, I just would like to say that one of the most exciting moments of literary disco is any mention of Sweet Valley High.
Those books are the rapiest kids' books I've ever read.
Oh my God. But no one in the world talks about Sweet Valley High. I mean, I'm 42, so perhaps that's appropriate. But it was just a thrill to hear those 3 words.
We did Sweet Valley High was pretty early on, but we just did Babysitter's Club like 2 months ago, and that's bananas. Babysitter's Club is bananas. It's a whole book about why being a divorcee is bad. It's really bizarre.
I was super into those. So I would go to the Tower books and I would pick up the next, I would like run my finger down the row to see which Babysitter's Club, had just
all the
showed up. I didn't have, it was a thing.
Yeah. Oh, it was a big thing. I mean,
I
maybe
love
with
Tower
chicks.
books, though, more importantly. Love the Tower books.
Okay, we can get to questions from smart people right now.
How dare you?
So we've got a question here. Todd, this is from Lynn Casella. Do you prefer writing novels or collections of short stories? Which is more difficult for you to execute properly?
Ooh, well, it's hard to say. If I had nothing else I'm gonna learn how to speak. If I didn't have any money or bills to pay, if I didn't worry about money, I would only write short stories. I love the short story. I absolutely love it. And it allows me to put on a different suit of clothes really, much more often than writing a book does. A book takes me, 18 months to 2 years to write, really. And that's a lot of time to spend with the same characters in my head. And so I've always really loved to write short stories. But the fact of the matter is, I hadn't written a short story before I wrote this book in about 9 years because I've been so busy writing books. And when I wasn't writing novels, I would spend that shorter time writing essays because I found that I really enjoyed writing essays quite a bit. I feel like I'm a better novelist now than I ever have been. And I believe earlier in my career, I was a better short story writer than I was a novelist. And so I suspect the answer today would be that I find it harder to write a short story than I do a novel. A novel, I feel like I know how to do pretty well. Writing these short stories for this new book that comes out in February was hard. And a challenging process to turn that part of my brain back on after being off that bicycle for so long.
Do you think that I'm just adding this question. Do you think that any of your novels or characters will turn into a TV series or film one day?
Well, Gangster Land, like I said, has been optioned by Amazon for a TV series. I'd tell you all the people involved, but I can't. But suffice to say, it's really good folks. And so I'm very excited about the possibilities for that. The books have nearly been a series on TV many, many times. In fact, CBS exercised their option. They greenlit the pilot This was in 2012, 2013, something like that. And then at the last minute, said no, which was crazy. So that we've always been very, very close. The property itself has been owned by some of the biggest names in TV, literally, since 2009. But where we are now with Amazon, I think, is closer than we've ever been to realizing, seeing this as a show itself.
When you're super famous Amazon person, will you come back and do an Alta Asks live?
No, I'm sorry. I gotta.
Okay.
There's a lot of.
I figured.
A lot of stuff going on.
Potentially.
Just a lot of going out. No, I don't go out anymore. Yes, I'm free.
Okay, great.
This is the first time I've worn a shirt with a collar since February, by the way.
Kristen Gifford wants to know, what was your trajectory as an author and then director of a writing program? When did your MFA come in? Mm-hmm. Part 2, do you think people can develop careers as writers and even teachers of writing without completing MFAs?
So I'll take the last question first. Absolutely. Okay. I didn't have an MFA until I'd already written half the books that you see behind me. I had published, I think, 6 books before I went and got my MFA. And I got my MFA because I'd been hired to start an MFA program, and I didn't have a graduate degree. So, my trajectory as an author, I'm 15 or 16 books in. So the simplest thing I can tell you is that I started out writing short stories. I got a bunch of short stories published. I sold my first novel in 1998 and have basically written a new book every 18 months or so. Because in the crime genre, you really have to put out a new book every 18 months to 2 years. But I essentially had a de facto MFA before I had an MFA because I had taken 2 years of classes at the UCLA Extension Writers Program directly after I got out of college. And that was essentially like going to an MFA program. I took, 4 classes a quarter at the UCLA Extension. It was great. And I had fantastic teachers, some of whom work for me now at the UCR MFA. And so I've been teaching since my first book came out. UCLA Extension Writers Program hired me in 2000 to teach for them right after my first book came out. And I've been teaching ever since. And then I started the MFA program at UCR, which is a low residency MFA program. It launched in 2008. Heather, I think, was in the 3rd class or something like that. She came on 3rd or 4th class. And the University of California didn't really have a lot of faith in it. They basically were like, yeah, go ahead and give that a try. And, I think they just didn't believe that a distance learning education was possible in the 21st century. Who would ever need to ever learn from home? And very quickly, we became one of the largest MFA programs in the country. And so right now, 12 years in, we have 400 some alums. We have about 100 students in the MFA program who are, best-selling writers, showrunners, movie producers, studio executives, a little bit of everything. We've been extraordinarily successful. And part of that, I think, is because my philosophy for an MFA program, to respond to the overarching thematic question, is about creating careers, not just teaching craft. And so we put a real emphasis on the business side of the writing life. And so every single student who comes through the program has their book or their movie or whatever read by agents and publishers. The screenwriters have their books read by agents and studio executives. Every single person gets that shot so that it's not a theoretical degree. It is an actual experience where you're going to be sitting in front of the person who's going to help you get your career after the MFA program. And it's the primary difference between what we do at UCR and what other MFA programs do. A lot of MFA programs don't talk about publication. They don't talk about their career. They only talk about the time that you're in the program. And they also don't talk about genre fiction, which we put a premium on as well. And I think that's a 1900s model of creative education. People want to earn a living. People want to get paid. People want to eat. They don't want to have to work a job that they hate to do the thing that they love. And so we try to prepare people for that life.
Wow.
And they do a good job.
Thank you. I mean, Heather's a great example. I mean, Heather at some point said to me, or I at some point said to Heather, like, I think you could really become a really good book critic. I think you do this at a professional level. And I don't even know if Heather had ever even considered being a book critic. And now she's one of the top book critics in the world. All because of me.
It is. He's not lying. That is a real story.
Well, with that lovely story, we are over time. Tod, when you are super famous on Amazon, etc.,
I feel like I'm pretty famous online.
More so. Please come back.
Clarify.
Okay, you're right. Please continue to write for Alta. Thank you both. Thank you both so much for joining us. If you've missed any part of this or just want to relive it, this interview will be up on Alta Online later today.
I'll be going around to houses.
Tod will be not social distancing and coming door to door to answer any of your further questions personally. Next week, we've got Katie Flynn joining us Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. right back here at Crowdcast. Again, you can click on this little green button to check out Tod's work. And thanks for supporting Alta, everyone. Thank you, Heather, of course. And Tod, you are awesome and hilarious. This was really fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. It's great to be here.
Thank you.